and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk ETC. I have Bob Summerwill with me, and he's going to fill us in on the latest ETC news. So welcome, Bob Summerwill.
Well, thank you. And yeah, I think this is actually our second show, right? I spoke to you for the first time.
Been on the show before, that's right.
Shortly after ETC Summit 2018, where I spoke as a guest there. You know that Anthony had invited me along after we'd met at EdCon for the first time earlier that year.
So why don't you, nevertheless, why don't you give the audience a kind of an introduction? I know you're working for ETC Cooperative, so why don't you just give a little bit of your background real quick in a few seconds.
Right. So most of my career was video games. I'm a software engineer. I worked for Electronic Arts for many, many years, doing C++, console games, FIFA, NBA, NHL, Fight Night, across PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4, Xbox 360, Xbox One, PC, and then iOS and Android. I ended up near the end of that actually being the software architect for all of EA Sports, all platforms, all titles, everything in the world. I left EA in 2014, really having kind of come to the end of my tether of being a corporate wage slave, and really wanting my freedom. I was really into mobile and wearables at that time, so I started working for a company doing mobile games. I started messing around with the Gear smartwatches from Samsung. I was working on Tizen, which is a mobile Linux, which Samsung looked as though they were going to basically launch a whole rival range of flagship phones that they would have got out from underneath Google by having sort of Samsung Z flagship phones that would be similar to the Samsung Galaxy range. Apart from they would be running a Linux distro instead of Android. So I that was what I was doing next. And then I met Vitalik for the first time in 2014. In 2015, I really got engaged on the Ethereum project. First volunteering in the community, then I got hired by the Ethereum Foundation and was actually working on the C++ client there. I later joined Consensus, where I worked for a year on Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. Firstly, working on getting the thing booted up. I was a co-lead architect there. Spoke at the launch event on the technical roadmap, and then I served as the secretary of the technical working group, and then the vice chair of the technical steering committee. After that, I worked for a little while, first on Sweetbridge, then on Quant Fury, both other sort of Ethereum-based projects. And then, I got invited to speak at ETC Summit in 2018. Came to Korea, had a great time, really liked everyone. And then, as of January this year, the co-op were looking to have to appoint an executive director, and Barry Silbert, remembered me from Summit, and I'd been still in contact with Anthony through that time, and they asked, well, hey, would you consider coming and working for the cooperative? And it was like, well, yeah, sure. I also spoke to ETC Labs at the time, and I spoke to IOHK, and here I am.
So ETC is lucky to have you.
Well, thank you. I'm very lucky to have the opportunity.
All right. So why don't we get into what everybody is looking forward to? So why don't you tell us the latest ETC news that we should pay attention?
Well, we've just sort of come through conference season. So we had ETC Summit was here in Vancouver, where I live, on October the 3rd and 4th. and we had an awful lot of people, and it was fantastic. I think we had around twice as many people as there were at Summit 2018 in Korea. We had 550 ticket reservations, but I mean, they're free, so you always, you don't know how many people are really going to turn up. But I mean, I think we had about 300 peak attendees at any given point. We were at the Vancouver Convention Center, which is on the waterfront, beautiful location. We had a thing where the original venue, the Pinnacle, ended up having industrial action, so we had to sort of scramble at the last minute to move the hotel and the venue and change the catering and the filming people and like everything. But that happened, and the event was really very successful. And along the theme of ETC, ETH kind of bridge building, we had Virgil Griffith from the Ethereum Foundation again. And then, since last year, we now have Afri as the hard fork coordinator. Previously, the hard fork coordinator on Ethereum. Previously of Parity as well. We have Wei, who's also working on Parity and working on F and F2 stuff too. We had representation from ChainSafe. And we had Boris and Brooke, who have been heavily engaged in Ethereum protocol development and community with the Ethereum magicians there as well. Also, Chelsea Palmer, another local who has been helping out on Ethereum community and ecosystem. And a large number of other people there, and a big chunk of people from IOHK as well, which was fantastic. That we didn't really know. Well, is Charles going to come and speak? Are we going to have IOHK people there? That through 2019, really efforts on ETC from IOHK have been on hold, and but yeah, Charles came along and he keynoted at the end, and we've got hope of a return to the table from IOHK, which is fantastic. And the other big win is that Donald came. So Donald had a keynote on day one. Donald McIntyre is so important to ETC. He is the philosopher and the guy with fantastic oversight and totally. And he had kind of rage quit during the year, as like, I'm not coming to ETC Labs Summit, because obviously there were a good number of tensions through the year there as ETC Labs have kind of found their way into the ecosystem. That having a large kind of commercial entity, is often seen as threatening for more community-oriented people. We had that same dynamic on Ethereum with Consensus. To my mind, Consensus, and Joe Lubin have been, perhaps the main contributors towards the success of Ethereum, more even than the foundation, in that they have built things. They've provided employment and have funded ecosystem infrastructure development, building tools, building things like the EA or partnerships and enterprise engagement, and they've really answered the question of, well, how can Ethereum be used in the world, and bridged that across. And I'm really very hopeful that we're going to have to see that same kind of dynamic with labs, that of really like, let's make this thing go.
Right. There's always the tension. We companies are very useful, but then some people are suspicious.
Absolutely.
About that. And you gave the example of Consensus in ETH land, and I could have also gave the story of how when IBM and Red Hat Red Hat started becoming powerful in the open source community, how some people looked at that with suspicion. And so, yeah, there's always that.
Or another one is IBM within Hyperledger. So, a lot of people will say, oh, we're building on Hyperledger. But what they really mean is they're using Hyperledger Fabric, which is one of a number of different open source projects within that Linux Foundation umbrella. They completely conflate Hyperledger Fabric, which is a open source project, with IBM Blockchain, which is a commercial offering on top of that, with Hyperledger, the consortium, and that again really happens because IBM are the big fish. If you had 3 or 4 consensus style companies within Ethereum, you wouldn't have that same fear. If you had 4 or 5 ETC Labs style, businesses in the ETC side, again, you wouldn't have that problem, right? It's the fact that you've only got one that makes people fear, corporate capture of the ecosystem. But the problem is, if you only have one and you basically are like screaming and shouting at them, they might go away and the whole thing fails. And if you are sitting in that side, so I've been in this position when I was at Consensus. So you're sitting there with a bunch of money and resources and goodwill, but people are a bit scared of you. So what do? Do you do less? Do you stop doing projects?
You just got to proceed carefully, I would guess.
Well, yeah. What you need to do is just keep spending the money and grow the pie. Yeah. In the hope that that's really going to attract other people in, and it should, right? Is going, look, this is a commercially successful ecosystem. Well, other big companies should be getting in and competing, but you can't do less because that makes the thing move terrible. But yeah, you obviously have this imaging. You have to be careful of what you say and do so that what you do is not perceived as bullying. So that's a tricky line that ETC Labs have to tread. Is how do they help ETC succeed, but without being seen as bullies?
Right, and I'm just to be clear, we're all really glad ETC Labs is around and supporting Ethereum Classic, and we all hope that they become like another consensus-sized company that's doing great things and is even more well-funded.
Yeah, and I think that's been a large part of my work at the co-op through this year is for myself building that trust with labs. Building those relationships, that one-on-one relationship with Terry, and building a relationship with James, and getting to know the people at ETC Labs, know Liz and then within Labs Core as well, with Stev and the other developers on that core team, is really spending the time trying to build relationships people, and also with community people like Donald, and really trying to get to a position of saying, can we all, get to a place where we've got a decent level of trust together, and when we can work together. And the same thing with Afri. Afri, I think, has done a great job as a hard fork coordinator of trying to, ride all these horses at the same time and get us to move through a hard fork. So then that happened with Atlantis. It was kind of, a bit rough getting there. But when we got there, great. We've got a pattern. We've been through the cycle once, right? So then the next one is going to be easier because we're not all utterly distrustful of each other. Right. We've had a success. So let's see. Well, can we get a second success? Can we get a third success? And really get to a position where we can, really take, best advantage of the resourcing that we have available to move ETC forward in the way that we all want it to move forward. And I think we've had a great stride there with Atlantis. that we're up to Byzantium. We're not old and rotten anymore. We're kind of, we're in a goodly kind of place. And then we've just had a meeting where we were talking about Agatha, which is the next change, which brings us up to Constantinople. So the aim is for that to be live in January. And then now we're talking about the following hard fork, which will bring us up to Istanbul. And that looks like it's going to happen probably around April or May of next year.
But just for the audience's sake, when you say bring us up to Constantinople, bring us up to Istanbul, can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Okay, so what that is it's adopting opcode changes or protocol changes, which Ethereum have done since the time that we forked. That they forked. ETC was, it was quite far behind on the protocol. We had not taken advantage of improvements and changes that had happened over the last 3 years. So the process that we have is really with the ECIP process, the Ethereum improvement process, where people will within the ETC ecosystem will put forward proposals on changes or improvements or upgrades that we should make to the ETC protocol. Now, where we are right now is really very close to Ethereum line, with the primary differences being on ETC, you didn't have the DAO fork, that we have the monetary policy was added, and also that the difficulty bomb was disabled. But that's basically all that had happened on ETC until we had the Atlantis hard fork. So all of opcode changes and improvements of 3 years worth had not been brought in. So we were quite incompatible, and various bits of tooling, you couldn't build ETC things with them. We've also had a deficit in terms of just general tools and infrastructure and things. So what we had with Atlantis is catching up, about 2 years worth of catch up that brings us a lot closer to compatibility with ETH. Now, the thing to be clear about is that these changes or compatibility things, they're not controversial changes at all. They're like little bug fixes, little improvements. It's good stuff. Also, as we're going through the ECIP process, we also have a keen eye on places where our philosophy and priorities are different. So it's not like we're just going to slurp up everything that they do if it compromises, immutability, backwards compatibility, or any of the other things which are important to us. So for the changes within Byzantium that came in Opal, we carefully looked at all the changes and had, open discussion and came to the conclusion, no, it's all fine for ETC as well, and off we go. And it's the same deal for Constantinople changes for Agatha, which it looks like there's basically just going to be 3 changes that are there for Agatha, which if you give me a second, I'll look and see what they are.
Well, it's comforting to know that, right, these changes aren't just thrown into the pot. They all happen carefully and methodically, and people evaluate, is this a change that we want to add to ETC?
Absolutely. So the 3 changes that there are in Constantinople, which will come in for Agatha for us, is adding bitwise shifting instructions. So, that's not very controversial. Would you like to shift numbers left and right? Yes, that's useful. The second thing is a create to opcode. So let me find where that is. So yes, the create to opcode it basically allows you. So the motivation is allows interactions to be made with addresses that do not yet exist on chain, but may be instantiated later. So this is something which is very important for state channels, to allow counterfactual use of state channels. So, I mean, counterfactual it's sort of like using game theory as a means to scalability by basically saying, well, if you do cheat, I can get my money back, kind of thing. But we don't have to actually do the operations on chain for that to be in effect. You just are setting up the ability to make the things happen on chain if you need. So it's a very clever bit of game theory. So that's a key opcode coming in, which is required for the vast majority of all state channels. So really, that lets state channels on ETC. The one exception to that is fate channels from Funfair, which don't require Create 2. So we can actually do state channels today on ETC, but only that one implementation, where when we have Create 2, a whole bunch of different state channels are going to be workable. I think maybe 4 or 5 different companies have got their own different implementations, or different projects have those. So as of January, we will have the ability to do all of the same state channel kind of technology as is happening on Ethereum. And it's not like, oh, ETC is having to fork these or anything. It's literally the same stuff will just work for us.
Yes. No, yeah, there's no reason to be incompatible, right, with non-controversial things. So yeah, if we could, yeah, no, that's all great.
And then the final one is ext code hash opcode. So what that is an opcode which returns the hash of a contract's code. So the motivation, as stated, is many contracts need to perform checks on a contract's bytecode, but don't necessarily need the bytecode itself. For example, a contract may want to check if another contract's bytecode is one of a set of permitted implementations, or it may perform analysis on code, or you might want to whitelist a contract with matching bytecode. So it says contracts can presently do this using the ext code copy opcode, but it's expensive because it's actually like doing all of the code. So what this new opcode is saying is give me a hash of the code. Don't give me all of the code. Just give me a hash, and then what you can do is a bunch of logic around this kind of static analysis of code. So just a simple, useful kind of little bit of functionality. So that's it. That's a garter that will happen in January. Now the thing is, if you're already using Parity or Multigeth, well, the code for those is already in there because they run Ethereum as well. So actually enabling that stuff for ETC is very, very simple. It's kind of like configuration file kind of stuff. Just right. If ETC, then run, turn this bit of code on that's already there, which is already, had heavy testing and has been live on Ethereum mainnet for, a year or two.
All right. Good.
So then the following change for Istanbul support, what you have there is, you see, so Istanbul is still underway. Istanbul is in testing, is on testnet stuff on Ethereum. So we're really at a place where we've almost caught up. We're almost at the same place. We really are. In the latest all-core developers call for Ethereum, which happened on Thursday, just gone, they are setting block numbers. So it looks like December the 4th is when Istanbul is going to go live for Ethereum. But the thing is, we're going to be starting looking at that, already. These hard fork changes for ETC, they don't have to be sequential. It's not like we have to wait till January until we even think about what we're going to do with Istanbul. Because again, the thing is that the code is already in those clients. Right. It's already done. So what we can do is, we can have an Istanbul compatible testnet for ETC today if we wanted. It's very, very trivial to do that. So looking through the changes that you have, which are in Istanbul, so there's one new bit of functionality, which is EIP 152, which is adding Blake 2 compression function F precompile. Now, Blake 2, for anyone who doesn't know, is the hashing algorithm used in Zcash.
Okay.
So what you have here is, a bit more support for sort of ZK snarks. So Byzantium was the first change which had added, these precompiles for supporting ZK snarks. And, you're starting to have projects which are building ZK snark private transactions on Ethereum. Those are happening. So this is just, another thread of that. Well, you want to do some private transactions? You want to do some ZK snarks in ETC? Great. Here you go.
Right ahead.
So that's very simple. There's another bit of functionality which is called EIP 1344, which is chain ID opcode. And what that does is it very simply adds an opcode which returns the current chain's unique identifier. So EIP 155, which was included in Spurious Dragon, so we've got it on ETC already, is basically like adding an identifier for the chains so that you can stop replay, identify, am I on this chain or that chain? So, that there was no replay protection originally between ETH and ETC, so you can have all these replay attacks. So, that got addressed shortly afterwards with this chain ID. But the problem is you couldn't find what the chain ID was within, a smart contract, I think, where we are. So, yeah, here we go. So this EIP adds an opcode that returns the current chain's unique identifier. It would be of great benefit to have this same probability inside smart contracts. So, I guess you couldn't get this stuff on chain. I'm not totally aware of the detail, but yeah, what you've got there is basically the ability to see what chain you're at.
So wait, now, so conceivably you can have the exact same bytecode run on Ethereum ETC, and it could detect what chain it's on, and then maybe make some little modifications and behave accordingly. That's kind of interesting.
So it says, just again, the rationale, the current approach is to specify the chain ID at compile time. This problem will result in problems after a hard fork, as well as human error that may lead to loss of funds or replay attacks on signed messages. By adding the proposed opcode, it will be possible to access the current chain ID and to validate signatures based on that. Currently, there's no specification for how chain ID is set for a particular network. And I guess there is a potential where a contentious split, you might have a fight over chain IDs. I guess this is like the exchange thing, who's going to be BTC?
Right. Right.
So, if people are fighting over what the chain ID is, you have some contentious split, and it's like, well, I'm not going to let go of the chain ID. You could still have a problem here, but generally, there hasn't been any issue, and
what point you're making? That somebody could hard fork, but they're not obligated to give the unique different chain. I see what you're saying.
Maliciously pretend still to be.
Good point. Yeah, I didn't think of that.
But I mean, in general, the thing is, you can never mitigate against malicious activity.
It does cooperate. Yes, like if somebody wants to have a private phone of ETC, kind of like what the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance tries to do with Quorum, then it might be nice to auto detect that. And
right. So basically, what you do have is Pedro, who works on Chain Connect, actually spent a lot of time trying to get together like a global table of all the Ethereum IDs, all of the Ethereum networks. So ETC, ETH, and Expanse, and Music Coin, and Gawley and Cotti, and Coven, and really saying, well, what are the answers for all of these? Essentially, because accessing things with a wallet should be able to work for all of these. There's no reason why wallets and things shouldn't be able to talk to all of these chains. That stuff shouldn't really need hard coding. So let me see if I can find a URL for this one. So there's chain ID and there's network ID. So chain ID is actually the he's seeing some tweets here. So why should we be using chain ID? Currently, the most common pattern to detect if a wallet or dApp is connected or testnet is to use the network ID, which is provided by the JSON RPC method net version. However, the only reason this seems reasonable is because Ethereum clients have matched the network ID and the chain ID. So mainnet is 1, Ropsten is 3, Rinkaby's 4, Gawley's 5, Coven's 42. But he says, so it's mostly a coincidence that it even works. Or wallet should only concern itself with the chain ID, because that's actually relevant to the layer 1 for signing transactions. Network ID is technically layer 0, which is concerned about the network between nodes. So, that's an interesting thing, which I guess you'll have seen as well, Christian, is when nodes are starting up and they're in that bootstrapping phase, Ethereum and Ethereum Classic nodes all talk to each other, right? They're all on that same protocol, and they're kind of having to go, hey, talk to each other. And then the first thing they work out is, oh, yeah, we can talk to each other. Oh, but you're a Classic node, and I'm an Ethereum node. Okay, so we shouldn't be swapping data because we're not the same. So actually, network ID is the layer 1 ID, but really you want a layer 2. So he says, in fact, any net prefix method should be avoided unless you're managing the network of nodes. Then why didn't we use chain ID in the first place? Because we didn't create a JSON RPC method. As usually every EVM blockchain would match the chain ID and network ID. So anyway, this is something that we've discovered in the meantime, is really we should be using chain IDs. So this particular EIP is adding an opcode for doing this detection within smart contracts. And I do remember now, so the thing that happened earlier was adding a JSON RPC, so that if you are, if you're writing a dApp, you can talk to your node and you can ask it, hey, what's your chain ID? Through JSON RPC. That's what we had before. And this latest EIP is going, oh, and you can actually, ask that within the smart contract itself as well. Whereas you could only ask on the web side of the dApp. So now you can ask that question within the smart contract itself. So then that gives you a real ease of doing, either replay protection things or, anything which is basically conditionally wanting to do a different thing depending on what chain you're inside.
Good stuff.
So, and then the only other bits of stuff that there are in Istanbul are gas repricings based on, several years of actually running the network and seeing how often particular opcodes are used and how expensive implementations of those are actually, and really come to the conclusion that some of the gas costs were wrong and they need redoing. Now, the thing that is going to happen differently for ETC versus ETH is, that backwards compatibility is really, really valued. Immutability and backwards compatibility are incredibly important on the ETC side. Now, what's happening on Ethereum for Istanbul is some of these gas repricings are actually going to break existing deployed smart contracts. There's a CoinDesk article on this, which is talking about, I think it's 160 different smart contracts. Primarily, highest profile ones are from the Aragon project, where pricings are actually going to break existing contracts. Now, I guess on the Ethereum side, that's sort of seen as, it's okay to break some eggs to make an omelet kind of thing. Right. That they're going to be, that they're working with the Aragon team, and the Aragon team are kind of understanding, and, they'll redeploy and fix them up and it will be okay. It's not going to practically break anything immeasurably. But, it is not something which on the ETC side would be seen so kindly. So the good thing is that there's a good planned solution to it. So Way has been working on this EVM versioning EIP, which is EIP 1702. And what you have there is really saying, well, it's okay to make non-backwards compatible changes in software. That happens. That you learn thing, and the approach that we had wasn't right. We need to do a different thing. But the way that you handle that well is through versioning. You say, right, this is a new major version. This is Windows 7, Windows 8. So the way that this is, the EIP 1702, it's called Generalized Account Versioning Scheme. And what it's saying is, simple summary, introduce account versioning for smart contracts. So upgrading the VM or introducing new VMs can be easier. So abstract is, this defines a method of hard forking while maintaining the exact functionality of existing accounts by allowing multiple different versions of the virtual machines to execute in the same block. And it says this is also useful to define future account state structures when we introduce on-chain WebAssembly virtual machine. Now, on ETC, there are no plans on WebAssembly yet. I don't, maybe there would be, or maybe, ELA, IELA, the virtual machine which IOHK have been working on. I don't know, some of that might make sense, but, for now, we're EVM only. But what you have here is, okay, we need to change gas costs, do we? Well, that's fine. But what that means is we're on to EVM 2 now. We're on to version 2. So what you do is, rather than what's happening on Ethereum, where at that hard fork point, they're just going to unconditionally change the gas costs for all accounts. Like, that's what they're doing, which does break some existing smart contracts. So what we're going to do, it sounds like, on ETC is we're going to introduce this versioning piece. So any account that there is going to have a version. So I guess, all of them that are out there at the moment are sort of explicitly version 0. But as of the hard fork where we introduce this functionality, what we have is accounts that are created after that point are going to be, version 2.
Okay, that's interesting to have. Okay, yeah, that's a creative solution.
So what that means is, any smart contracts which are deployed after whenever this is, April of next year or whatever on ETC, they're going to get the new gas costs. So, if you've got misbalanced costs and, you've got, basically a not EVM at that point, well, newly deployed smart contracts are going to get the new, so that's fine. But where we'll differ from what you have on ETH is existing ones, they still have those same costs, right? Because that was kind of like the deal when they were launched, right? That was kind of like the social contract. That was, it was the actual contract. The code is law contract at the time they were deployed. So what you will have instead is, very simple logic in the client of saying, if version equals 2, then costs equals new costs, else cost equals old cost. So what that means is that old world stuff is going to keep working. Now, when I had this kind of conversation on the old core devs on Ethereum, the thing is that pricings are done for two different reasons. Either it's just this sort of, tweaking thing. It's like an optimization task, really, of saying, well, look, we know more about what's being used and we know more about how efficient our implementations are. And, we can say, well, that operation was, that was charged too highly or charged too low. And we need to correct the prices because otherwise, the machine is not running efficiently. This is just straight optimization. It's, good maintenance, good stewardship. The problem is when it breaks existing scripts, like that's bad. That's really bad. So that will happen on Ethereum. Like that's going to happen. But we don't want to do that on ETC. So we're going to have a slightly different version. We'll take those repricings. Great. Thanks. That's awesome. We'll do that. But we're only going to conditionally apply it to new contracts. The second category, though, of gas repricings is emergency repricings.
For denial of
service vector, right? So like the Shanghai attack blocks in 2016 of, oh my goodness, this thing is so badly repriced that you can bring the network to a halt. Now in that case, you have to unconditionally fix the prices. You can't say, oh, well, we didn't know. And because of immutability, that guy's made a script that kills the whole network. But, immutability, right? Literally, the project's dead. So, you have to break some eggs at that point. So emergency repricings have to be unconditional because they will break scripts. Because you want them to break at least the attacking one. That's the whole point of the change, is to break that. Now, you're going to have side effects. That will probably break some other, good intended ones that maybe happen to be using the same kind of opcodes, but not in a breaking kind of way. So there is some risk of collateral damage in those emergency situations. But from what I can determine, these repricings are not necessarily emergency repricings so much as they are, well, we've learned more and we're going to optimize the EVM. So that's what we're looking to do. Now, it may be the case that some of these repricings are potential future emergencies, right? There may be things that could, break things horribly in the future.
It's doubtful. I mean, like you said, these changes have been suggested because we have a lot of more experience now. So
But yeah, I mean, I just want to be clear that while for our hard fork of Istanbul, we are looking to add, versioning conditionals around it to have better backwards compatibility. You can never have perfect backwards compatibility because you have got these emergency situations of, the network is being killed, and we have to, fight back against the attacker, because it is mortal threat to the network.
No, security is a reason to do a trade. Definitely. I don't think that'll ever be controversial to do.
No, and I think that generally that's the only reason that you should have unconditional changes. Because really, if you think of it in terms of a law analogy, right? If you think of these improvement process pieces as bits of law which are being put before Parliament or whatever, right? Generally speaking, when you pass new laws, they apply from the point that they are passed, right?
Right.
Don't suddenly go, Oh, right. Yeah. We've decided that so and so that was a very popular thing is now illegal. And anyone who's ever done that in the past, we're going to put you in jail tomorrow because of the thing that you did 20 years ago, which wasn't illegal at that time. It's kind of not nice to do things retroactively generally.
Right.
So to my mind, the only place that you would do that is that pure security thing, is saying, this poll is a mortal threat to the whole project.
Right. No,
in those cases, obviously, yeah, you change the rules retroactively. Well, because if you don't, you're dead.
Right. No, I'm also thinking of, like, in America, we have a lot of rights, a lot of freedoms, freedom of speech, but national security can override.
Always.
Right? So
it has to.
Because if you destroy the country of America, it makes no sense to protect certain citizens' rights.
Yeah, the country doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
But at least we didn't screw with the Constitution.
Right.
So yeah, what you've got then in Istanbul, is really, again, is a very small set of changes. That ZK snark thing, the opcode for the chain ID, which is going to be like a one-liner somewhere, and just some repricings, which we would have, conditionally. And again, the code for all of that already exists. That the versioning bits don't exist. Though actually, EIP 1702, which is the versioning, there is the code for that actually written, I believe, in Geth parity and Aleph. I think it is already there. It's just not activated because it's it's still kind of lurking. But again, what you're looking at there is a really relatively small set of changes, and within a few months, here you go. We're caught up. We're compatible. But what you really have there, I think the narrative you can have is misperceptions that people may have about ETC as, it's just a protest movement. There's no developers. It was only there to like help the hacker or whatever. I think we are well past that now, and we're really soon going to be in this position of saying, well, look, we're not little baby brother ETC anymore. We're a sibling. That we used to like needle each other when we were kids, but we're kind of grown up now. We're both adults, and
right.
And it may be that the little brother was actually quite wise in certain ways, and can bring a lot to the table. But we're not going to do that in a dickish kind of way. Let's collaborate, because we've got an awful lot in common. So that's what you saw happening at DevCon, straight after ETC Summit, where both myself and Terry Culver spoke at the main Ethereum conference. So I spoke, giving an overview of the situation on the ETC ecosystem. Terry spoke twice. Firstly, he spoke about what ETC Labs are doing, everything that they've got going on, and announcing various things of benefit to both the ETC and ETH ecosystem. So he announced, Gitcoin, that ETC Labs are basically funding the Gitcoin project to bring Gitcoin bounties to ETC, so that we can have, so anyone that doesn't know about Gitcoin has not got an ICO. There is no coin. But what it is it's really a bit similar to like bounties that you'd have on GitHub, is saying, hey, here's a GitHub issue on a given token, on a given project, and someone can put a bounty on it and say, hey, if someone adds this functionality, fixes this bug, I will pay them, $100. So what you have with Gitcoin is that, but using, well, for them using ETH, but now we'll do it on ETC. So that what anyone can do is, if they are building a project and they want something to happen, they can put an ETC bounty on it. So one of the very first ones that will happen off that is the ETC Cooperative wants to put a bounty on adding kind of chain versioning support for Viper. Because Viper at the moment, the alternative to Solidity, you can't use it on ETC, basically because it relies on opcodes, which we haven't got yet, though we will have very, very soon.
Okay.
So what we want to do is in the same way as Solidity, you can parameterize it and say, hey, Solidity compiler, target Byzantium. So you can use the latest Solidity to generate bytecode, which will run on ETC. That bit of functionality is missing on Viper. So we're going to put a bounty up for it. And there are other bounties that we've talked about to do with EIP 1066, 66, which is status codes. So the status codes project, which Brooklyn Zelenka has proposed, which is actually an ERC. It's actually not a protocol level. It's higher than protocol levels. But what the status codes are is, it says this standard outlines a set of status codes in a similar vein to HTTP status codes, which provides a shared set of signals to allow smart contracts to react to situations autonomously, expose localized error messages to users, and so on. The current state of the art is either revert on anything other than a clear status or a low context true or false. So similar status codes are similar, orthogonal to reverting with a reason, but are aimed at automation. So really what you're looking at here with this standard is saying, well, can we have more than a success or failure? Can we have things very analogous to what you have on HTTP of service not available, or what have we got? So yeah, some examples that they've got on these status codes, failure or success, awaiting others, accepted, allowed, needs your permission, revoked, not applicable,
Right.
a whole range of kind of status code, like your 404, not available, that really you can have. So here, status codes for transfer failed, transfer successful, insufficient funds not required, a whole range of different status codes, in a similar way that you've had for HTTP. So
just all wonderful examples of how the blockchain infrastructure is improving and getting polished to make it that much nicer for developers.
That's right. I mean, I think what we're seeing here is it's kind of, the blockchain as a concept, anyone's saying, well, is it a thing? Is this going to happen? Is there any use here, or is this just like a scam? I think we're a bit past that. But the question is, well, how do you get from where we are to something which is as easy to develop on as, mobile development or web is today? I think that people will say, with blockchain, it's like the web was in 1994. And I'd argue, well, no, it isn't. It's like we're in the 1980s, and it's like everything is Unix, everything has to be written in C. You've only got one compiler, which is GCC, and all of you is like printf debugging. And if you do something wrong, it core dumps. That's where we are right now. So on error codes, it is like, did it work or not? And if it didn't work, well, why not?
Now I have to ask you, when you guys spoke at DevCon, what was the temperature of the reaction and the attitude towards anything ETC?
It was good. I mean, I as I always do at conferences, spent very little time in sessions and an awful lot more time talking to people. The networking is hugely more important. So what I was, the repeated story I was telling there was really this arc of progress on ETC, and saying, well, look, really, really soon, we're going to be very competitive. And so talking to people on client development, talking to projects, talking to infrastructure projects and saying, hey, just so you know, having ETC support as well is probably going to make a lot of sense for you really soon. So just FYI. And the reception there was really, really positive. I'm very, very confident that when we get to the point where the protocol is really compelling, it's kind of like a build it and they will come kind of time where people say, well, there's no DApp on ETC, and and it's true that there's very little happening in terms of that DApp layer. But the reason for that is that we've been missing infrastructure, and that the protocol itself has been even further back. So you have to be a true believer. You've had to be a true believer to put up with that. If you are just a DApp developer trying to build DApps and you don't really have a dog in the race as to who wins or what things are at the bottom, building on Ethereum, not Classic, has been the obvious choice. Because that's where all the tools are. That's where all the development effort is, and it's just been simpler and easier. But that's changing, and it's changing really rapidly. I think it's going to surprise a huge amount of people on that Ethereum side. Is going, oh, so ETC is like a real thing. It's not like a protest coin. It's not like a joke. It's not that was just because you wanted the hacker to get, it's not just, because you wanted to pump it because you were all Bitcoin maximalists and you missed out on the Ether sale and, you're just in it for the money, or any of these other bullshit kind of narratives. Instead, you really have, what you had at the time of the DAO fork was a genuine difference of opinion of in an emergency situation, do you intervene or do you not intervene? And, reasonable minds can fall on either side of the fence. You don't need that demonization.
What you're saying is we're leading to a situation where ETC is just as nice, just as easy to develop in. The only difference is maybe ETC is less expensive.
Well, yeah. So here's the thing.
But that's an attractive option.
It is very attractive. Now, so, again, back on the analogies, what I'd say is it's like you can be a Democrat or a Republican and you can still be a reasonable person, right? That what we have had is just to what you've had in America, right? Is that things have got so polarized that you can't talk to your neighbors anymore, because they might be on the wrong side, and don't talk about politics, that this real demonization. Oh, you're one of them. Never going to talk to you, and you're not coming to Thanksgiving anymore. Goodness me. I think, we should be past that. And that's kind of where we're getting with Ethereum and ETC. But here's the thing. I actually think ETC is going to be much, much more appealing purely on a technical basis at that point, irrespective of what you think about the philosophy or the ethics. Because, yes, gas prices are going to be cheaper. So do you want to basically deploy to ETC instead of ETH? And your gas prices are going to be cheaper. A lot of people are, yeah, sure. And I don't have to change any of my tools or anything. Yeah, it's just a drop down. And secondly, all of the, in quote, bad things that have happened on ETH after the time of the fork, like all of the ICOs, CryptoKitties, all of the bloat, none of that happened on ETC. We're not bloated.
So it's cleaner and less expensive.
Yeah. Who doesn't want those? And then here's the other thing. Well, people will say, well, yeah, but you're just not bloated because you have the users yet. If you had the users, if you had the developers, it'd bloat up just as fast and just be as bad. Well, that may sound like it's true, but the thing that's also changed is since the time of the fork, L2 scaling stuff actually exists now. state channels actually work and exist. You've got Funfair have got fake channels that don't even, depend on that Create2 opcode. And also Connext, which state channels implementation that's behind SpankChain, that works right now. You've got payments happening, in SpankChain on that now, like it's in production. So what will happen?
I think that's an important point. Yeah. So we are going to eventually solve the scaling issue, and what you're saying is ETC is not going to have this residual scar tissue from learning how to deal with the scaling issue.
Exactly. What you have on ETH is they've got this massive baggage of like the bad stuff of that learning, which bloated their state up, and they've got to carry that forever. That's never going away. And it's already like almost makes it impossible to run a full node. That you've this stuff from Eric Wall of going, okay, I'm going to see, like, is it true that it's impossible to like sync an Ethereum node? And he's like, right, I'm going to get a good thing, and I'm going to like do this Twitter diary of it. And and it took a month, took 28 days to do a full sync. So that's not an archival node. It's just a from Genesis full sync. 28 days on ETH. Now, I asked on the ETC Discord, hey guys, has anyone done like a sync on ETC recently, just so I've got a comparable? And Donald replied. And his answer was, where are we? Yeah, so this was in the development channel. So yeah, Donald says, I synced multi-geth. It took 12 hours, and it's 23 gig of disk on a Mac 2017. Where we are on ETC now, it's entirely reasonable. And if you're a Bitcoiner and you're syncing a Bitcoin node, I think that's, it's not, that would not be scary to them. If you're a Bitcoiner coming to ETC, you're not going to be horrified. Whereas ETH is just almost like done. The other thing that you have on ETH is the gas limit. That's recently got voted up from 8 million to 10 million gas. So on top of this already massively bloated state, you've got a very, very high rate of growth on top of that. So it's just getting worse and worse and worse all the time. And it's almost like, if you look at the trend on it, if that trend continues, it's going to take as long to sync as it took to sync. Like at the point, it can't keep up anymore.
Right.
And this was an issue that I saw in the very early days of my work on Ethereum, was that if you had a really, really weedy device, right, like a Raspberry Pi A with not a lot of memory, something with a really, weak CPU, not a lot of memory, and using like, not an SSD, using something that's a really poor throughput on the I/O as well. The sync rate on those could not necessarily keep time with the chain.
Always behind.
You're never going to catch up. That means that you can never do any operations with that. It's basically useless.
You effectively kill that option for running a node.
Right.
Hardware.
Basically saying, right, you're not going to run a node yourself. Now, what you have on ETH now is kind of close to that. Is really like, well, if you've got just a a laptop, you've got Donald's 2017 Mac, you can easily spend a month getting up to sync, and then it may not even be able to keep pace. In a year's time, maybe that can't even keep pace. It might take 3 months to catch up, and then only just keep up. or at some point, it literally will never catch up.
And so, in case anybody's not clear what Bob means about state channels, and level 2, the idea is to do things to only write to the blockchain, minimize the amount of times we write to the blockchain while still getting all the benefits we know and love. So we do it with higher levels. Yeah. And so we have our cake and eat it too.
And really, so state channels are kind of like the Ethereum equivalent of Lightning, effectively. But more, because they're not just payment channels, they're state channels that can have state updates as well as just value updates. So really the idea on both Lightning and state channels is think of them as like having a tab at a bar, right? You go in here, put your card down, go and, buy a bunch of drinks, and then you settle up at the end of the evening. And that's really the pattern on Lightning and state channels as well, is saying, well, look, you're going to kind of like put some deposits down at the front. You're going to like do transactions within that channel, within that, that little subledger, but you like settle up at the end. And what that means is it's a scaling mechanism. Lets like bundle up a bunch of transactions into a single transaction, but it's actually also a privacy feature. You can have a private state channel between two parties that can do a whole bunch of transactions, the details of which are never stored to the global ledger, because that's just your internal detail. But you settle up at the end. So say you've got two businesses, and one's a supplier and customer. Well, here they do a whole bunch of things on the invoice, and we're providing these services, and this is the unit rate of our, this is how much you're paying per hour, and all of this. Like, all of that is business sensitive information. You don't want that on the global ledger forever. Like, that's your business advantage. But you could still say, look, yes, so-and-so was paying.
After all these private transactions, here's the final balance
here,
of both parties.
Company A has paid Company B, $20 million. Thank you.
All the details of what was purchased with those 20 million and how many transactions it took, how many microtransactions.
Basically, because it's none of your bloody business. And it would actually be a negative for those to be on a global ledger in the first place, beyond the fact that it's just unnecessary, as in you don't need global consensus on all of those little details, because it's nothing to do with global. It really is a peer-to-peer transaction between those two parties. Yes, the fact that they've, here's a big bunch of ether for your services. Sure, yeah, that goes on the global ledger so that you can see that, that you've got consistency. But yeah, state channels are a marvelous technology, both for privacy and for scaling. And they work today on ETC. So for goodness sake, don't bloat up your L1. So, what I think the answer is going to be to that, well, ETC is going to be just the same. Well, it isn't, because we're not going to let it be. Because what we have is we've got those L2s already. And I think what we need to do is the broken incentive thing which made this bloat happen on ETH is that the miners vote on the gas limit, only the miners. So, of course, they're incentivized to vote that up to infinity because they get more fees. So, of course, they're going to vote up the gas limit if they get more money. Of course they will. But the downside to that you've seen happening on ETH is all of that massive bloat and the fact that chronically affects decentralization. It affects the ability to even run a node, even if they want to. So, what you end up with is on ETH, something like 60% of the transactions go through Infura. They go through those hosted nodes. Both because, it's free, that you can just connect to Infura and have them do the stuff for you, and you don't have to pay the money for, maintaining your node. but also because it is just really, really hard and expensive and slow to actually run your own node. It's basically bloated to the point where it's kind of only just viable. So what we can do, and I think we should do, is we need to stop that from happening. We need to have a counterbalance to those minor interests, and that counterbalance is the users. So what you have here is something very analogous to the user-activated soft fork that you had on Bitcoin, is basically users and node operators saying, hey, miners, you don't control the decisions. Like, we're stakeholders too, and we're not going to let you. And this, I guess, is like your House of Representatives versus your senators.
Right. Now, wait, just for the people that are interested in what you said about state channels. So there's multiple implementations, protocols. So we were talking before we started recording, and I believe you said statechannels.org is a nice website to get more information.
Yeah. So statechannels.org, what you have there are, and I'm reading, so there's 9 different state channels projects who've joined together here. So I'll just read out a unified state channel specification for Ethereum. So dated August 26th. Today, we're excited to announce an initiative to unify Ethereum state channel projects around a single standard. Since meeting in New York in May, we've been working behind the scenes to adopt a single specification, laying the foundation for a fully interoperable ecosystem of state channel applications. This project builds on years of research and development by our teams, as each of us pushed forward different components of the tech stack. Uniting around a single specification is another critical milestone with many benefits for the Ethereum ecosystem. Our goal is to enable the best possible user and developer experience for state channels. All wallets, clients, or applications that use the state channel specification will be compatible by default. Developers and users will not need to worry about supporting a multitude of competing standards, avoiding fragmentation. Over the next few weeks, we'll be sharing more information about this project and what it means. And that's signed by Seller, Connext, Funfair, Perron, Pisa, Prototipal, Magmo, L4, and the Ethereum Foundation. So those are all different projects that have been building state channels over the last couple of years. Now, Funfair are very interesting because their state channels work today. They're not dependent on that Create2 opcode. So Funfair are basically like gaming stuff, as in, like sort of gambling games. So they obviously needed state channels because they're doing like low micropayments. They can't have like every roll of the dice, every hand, having a mainnet transaction. That doesn't work. So they have spent the last couple of years building their state channels implementation that they call Fate channels, because it's gambling and gaming. So that stuff works today. Now Connext, so CONNEXT, so there is Connext.network. Funfair's is funfair.io, but Connext.network is actually the state channels implementation that is running Spank Chain. So again, on Spank Chain, you have a need for micropayments because it's cam girls and you're making payments to cam girls. So those, again, you don't want that to be on chain. You don't want that stuff to be going to global consensus. On both of these scenarios, you really have got that kind of like tab kind of scenario. Here, fund my gambling account, and then I'm going to sit and play some hands of, blackjack or whatever. Or on the other side, fund my Spank Chain, sit down and have a session. So those work already, and you've got a bunch of other teams building these other bits. So what you're going to have, I think, on ETC is what we need to say is that we cannot let miners vote ETC up to infinity. And what I've been thinking over the last few days, I think the very best way that we could approach this is something that is very analogous to what's happened on ETC with the monetary policy. is saying that certainty, economic certainty of how these things are going to work over a long period of time, lets free markets build in a very, very high. So certainty over gas limits and state growth on Ethereum is horribly negative, and it's already in a bad place, and it can probably only get worse from where it is. So what I'm going to propose that we do on ETC is that we have something very like the monetary policy. And what we would do is define, like an emissions curve, but it isn't an emissions curve. It would be a gas limit curve, or maybe straight line, along the lines of, on Bitcoin, Satoshi said, well, you have got the scalability that you need within that existing protocol, that Moore's law is basically going to be enough. So what I would propose there on the gas limit is saying, well, firstly, we need to have a cap now, which is significantly below where the Ethereum one is. And this is something which there is an ECIP for this, which was put forward by Anthony Lusardi. Let me find the number on this. So this is an informational one, which is 1047. So it says, reduce gas limit to 1 million. Abstract, all Ethereum-based chains face a major problem where blockchain bloat has the potential to dramatically increase and make it difficult to impossible for users to fully validate their copy of the ETC blockchain. To mitigate this issue, this ECIP is a request that miners target a gas limit of 1 million, which is an 8 times reduction from the current limit, so well above the average gas size of blocks on the ETC blockchain. So as adopting this now have any negative effect, but what it does is it stops, the thing blowing up in the future. Though this existing ECIP is just an informational proposal, as in it's like a social decision, right, of saying, hey, let's get this under control. Let's just talk to miners to say, hey guys, can you bring the limits down? The other thing that can be done outside of consensus here is just changing the defaults on the client software. So as in, can we change multi-geth and parity so that their gas limit is 1 million, not 8? Because I was told, for example, that on parity, the reason there's an 8 million limit on parity is just because that was the default on ETH, and it just got kind of cut and pasted across. Right.
This is interesting to me, this limit, because not having a limit is kind of fatalistic, like, oh, we haven't solved scaling, so let's just go for broke. And
it is.
But putting a limit like Anthony is proposing and you're suggesting is like a vote of confidence that we have state channels and we have faith that these solutions are going to solve our scaling needs, and so we can put this limit here, and it's going to increase confidence, and everybody wins.
That's right, and there's a range of sorts of softness or hardness of this that we could choose. As in, where it is right now is just an information. It's just a request. There's no code, even no code change. The next limit is going, well, actually, let's do code changes, but it isn't a consensus thing of just like let's change parity and change multi-geth to make that limit be a limit which is appropriate to ETC, not the limit that we just inherited from ETH. Like, it was completely unintentional that limit went up to 8 for ETC, purely from the fact that, parity, that limit changed in parity, and parity was being used, I guess, by most of the ETC miners. So, it's completely unintentional that it's gone that way. So you could do a slightly harder thing of encode, changing that default encode. That, though, still does not stop the miners from choosing to vote it up higher themselves. So that really is where a user-activated soft fork, or even a hard fork. I think I'd actually advocate a hard fork here of saying, maybe this should actually be something which is a protocol level change in our Istanbul of saying BTC style, we're going to lock it in. Like, it's going to get locked in the protocol, basically because we don't want the thing blowing up. Now, I wouldn't, where what you've had on BTC is like, that's locked in, and I think it might stay there forever. Like, I honestly think it might on BTC. And I think that, you know, it's these things aren't magic numbers, right? We don't know. Is 1 meg the correct block size for Bitcoin forever? Probably not.
Right.
So it's not very scientific. It was just, that was just like whatever Satoshi put that as a rate limiter years ago. Like, it was not meant to be like forever. So I think probably the best in my mind is, like happened with the monetary policy, we pick an initial limit, which is maybe 1 million, maybe 2 million, and hard fork that in. But also, that's not the limit forever. Like the monetary policy, let's define what that limit is going to be. And let's have a Moore's law kind of growth of, and maybe define what that curve is going to look like for decades.
So we're allowing growth, we're just limiting the amount of growth.
And a deterministic, known to everyone way that they can economically plan on top of.
No, that sounds pretty good. I mean, it sounds healthy for the system, and it would encourage people to work on state channels and evolve technology.
Yeah, I mean, because I think that the fact is, proof of work blockchains as they exist at the current time, they're kind of at the limits of their scalability, and that's fine. Is like, with the current tech we have, this is the range of scaling that we can cope with. So don't ignore the reality and blow the bloody thing up. That's true, but I think we can tread a better line than has happened on the Bitcoin side. Because on the Bitcoin side, well, firstly, you had this 2 years long civil war.
That was bad, yeah.
Which is horrific, of really saying, hey, if you want to go more than one, you're a heretic. Burn you at the stake. You dirty, dirty big blockers. And on the BTC side, it's like, here the holy number that was given by Satoshi, is the one and only truth forever. And it's like, well, that's not the case either. Like, I'm sure you can grow it a bit, maybe 32 meg is too big, but maybe 2's okay. Could we try 2? What I would love to have seen would have been that you had culture on the Bitcoin side of saying, look, we're operating as scientists. So what's going to happen is we're going to do an experiment. We're going to do an experiment with 2 meg blocks. So what we'll do is we will have a friendly hard fork where another network will be created, which will be BTC, but with 2 meg blocks. And what we're going to do is we're going to measure it and see what happens. How does that affect the number of nodes that run? How does it affect times? How does it affect, disk usage and all of this? And see how it goes. And guess what? Maybe it would have been, 2 meg feels good. The current software, it can cope with that. Thanks for the experiment, guys. And what we're going to do now is we're going to have a soft fork and raise the block size to 2 for BTC. And, hey, everyone who went and did the experiment, thanks for the experiment. That can probably wither away and die now. Come back into the main community and we'll carry on, and we're all together still. Instead of this horrific fracture and, because it's literally, hey, can 2 instead of 1 and see what happens?
Yep.
So instead of that, what you've got is BTC side, basically like, super mega conservative and maybe is never going to change ever. You've got your BSV people going absolutely the other way of saying, right, we're going to remove all limits. I don't know if you've seen this. So the Bsv Genesis upgrade, which is planned for January 2020, is removing all limits.
Oh, wow.
So you can have infinite blocks. And they've got things like uploading videos. Here, upload a video to the blockchain.
Oh my gosh.
On BSV. And it's like, you not see what happened with Ethereum. And that was with a limit that's not very, very high. If you upload a video, you realize every node operator has to carry that video forever. For every video that that everyone ever loads. It's like, do the bytes of a particular video have to have global consensus on them and be carried on an immutable ledger for eternity? Like, really? Does that make sense? Because basically, if you follow that pattern and you make the assumption that, you're really wanting to bring, a significant amount of commerce in the world over, what you're saying is every transaction, every button click, every file attachment, every email,
right,
you're going to put those in one big fat bucket? And every node operator has to carry the union of all of those forever?
I hope cooler heads prevail, and it sounds like people like you and other people are trying to learn from experiences of these other blockchains, and then try to make wise decisions and not avoid the scar tissue.
Well, that's absolutely it, and I think this speaks to, you've sort of cheekily had some people in ETC for a while saying, well, is the testnet for ETC? And that, I mean, that sounded quite ridiculous given, the relative size of the groups and everything. But I think it's actually true.
Right. No, in a sense, Ethereum, they move fast and break things. And then we kind of sit back and kind of pick the best of all their experiments and put them into ETC. Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what we're actually having with these pending forks. It's almost like, hey, can we like wind back to 2016, and can we have all of the good tech, but can we have like none of the baggage?
Right.
So yeah, it's like, here you go. You've got this time warp of a timeline that lets you like kind of like undo all of the bad stuff. So the DAO never happened. ICOs never happened. CryptoKitties bloat never happened. Oh, and we know more about the scalability of the tech, and we can basically make sure that this one doesn't blow up. Oh, and also stake channels work now. So it's not even like you've got a period of like, well, I want to scale, but the tech isn't there. Do some messy, horrible thing that I know isn't the right thing, but I'll kind of do it because I want to move forward. Right. And also, the other thing is Infura, that, everyone sort of like knows, like having to rely on this centralized service, it's a bit dirty that I've done that. But, it's fine. We're learning and we're building the things. But I mean, what the consequence of that is that particular instance is really like kind of unsustainable and kind of like needs to die. But that's fine because ETC is protocol compatible.
Right. Now, I have to admit, so I've enjoyed talking to you on our show today, but I have to admit, with listening to you, it gets me more and more hopeful and optimistic about ETC. It makes me more confident about the future. So you said a lot of good things.
That's great. I mean, I feel immensely positive myself.
Good. You said a lot of good stuff. So did we forget anything, or is there anything else from the summit or any other news you want to?
Yeah, just I mean, so some other bits that I'd said at the summit in terms of things that have been going on. The cooperative has joined the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance and Hyperledger. I was involved, obviously, with the setup of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. Something which perhaps people on the ETC side may not know so much about the EEA is that the motivation for the EEA was really that Ethereum technology can be used on public chains or for private and consortium scenarios as well. So what the EEA's initial focus had been is saying, well, you had an increasing number of companies that were starting to use Ethereum for their enterprise projects. Now, deployments of those to private networks, either purely within their own company, that sort of like, maybe you've got nodes or whatever for like different business units or different countries within a single corporation, or more interestingly are consortium chains. So for example, here, all the banks in Canada, so you've got a node run by the Bank of Canada, and then one for TD Bank, one for Royal Bank, and so on. And what you can have there is look, we're going to settle payments between ourselves each day, right? Or we're going to issue a bond or what have you. So really the motivation for the EEA was enterprises are going to build blockchain things. You see that happening already. And certainly my preference at the time was, well, I'd rather that they build on flavors of Ethereum than build on a completely different and incompatible thing like Fabric. Basically, because if you've got the same tech base in both of those scenarios, well, you've got multi-billion-dollar businesses depending on the technology. And because they depend on the technology, well, they're going to need tools. And they're going to fund development of all kinds of fancy tools and improve training and education and so on. And that's exactly what you see happening out of the EEA, is that you've got a whole bunch of good stuff has been built. So Microsoft, for example, the first blockchain as a service in Azure that was done in collaboration with Block Apps and Consensus back in November 2015. If you now go to the Azure website, which is Microsoft's cloud offering, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of blockchain stuff in there. There's a whole bunch of Ethereum stuff in there. They've got this Azure blockchain workshop thing. You've got Visual Studio Code integration, a whole bunch of like developer tooling. So you're starting to get the maturity in blockchain tooling that you see in, for mobile or web development. It's just that,
A strategic move then. So even though some people might not care about what is referred to as private or permissioned blockchains, by having them build on Ethereum-like technology, it benefits us indirectly. So that's
correct. And also the belief of many of the people at that founding point was that there will be a convergence between these two anyway. And that's what you see happening now, of really saying, well, don't think about private blockchains and public blockchains. Think about public and private transactions, but the actual networks can be exactly the same protocol. It's like a internet intranet thing. There will be many chain instances. Some of those will be global. Some of them will be completely private. Some will be somewhere in between, but all of them can speak the same protocol. Really the belief that there's no reason why suitably modular code bases should not serve all of these needs. And that's what you see happening in Hyperledger Bsv. So that's another interesting point, is the co-op is funding ChainSafe to add ETC support to Hyperledger Bsv. Now, Hyperledger Bsv was previously called Pantheon, and was built by Pegasus, which is the consensus protocol development team. So at the time that the EEA was founded back in February 2017, myself and Shahan Kashidurian were the co-lead architects. And I joked at the launch event, Shahan is the PhD in distributed systems, and I'm the cheerleader. And it's not untrue, not to totally degrade my development skills. I have got a 23-year career as a software engineer. I'm just, a bit self-demeaning there. But he basically went back to the lab and he built a whole new client, in the same way as IOHK did with Mantis, is really recognizing that the way that you're going to get, really demonstrate competence is you build a thing from scratch yourself. So that's what they did, is they built a whole new client job, which is Apache licensed, built by a team of, whatever, 50 odd top world-class professionals, but is compatible with the Ethereum mainnet and complies with the EEA specification and standards, and now lives under mature governance in the Linux Foundation. And it will soon have ETC support as well.
Nice.
And so what you've got there is, maybe if people say, corporations, like why would ETC be involved with those sellouts? Well, I think the answer is that the members of the EEA, in general, they're not there for coins. They're not there hodling ETH and like trying to get rich off hodling. They're technologists. They care about the Ethereum technology, and the Ethereum technology is the same between ETC and ETH. So all of these kind of, EIPs that we've been talking through, that sort of stuff is of benefit to an Ethereum chain within a corporation as well, because it's the same as a global one. And really the reason that I think that the same patterns apply here is because the core premise that you have on blockchain is trust minimization, right? The humans don't trust each other. And that is the same issue at all of the micro and macro scales. Yes, you've got potentially the biggest kind of win is doing these global level systems that weren't even possible before. But you have that same kind of benefit within a given country, within a given, industry, within a given corporation. People will say to me, well, why would you need a blockchain within a company? You're all in the same company anyway. You should just use a database. And it's like, okay, you've obviously never worked at a major corporation like I have. I worked at EA for 15 plus years. Do you think the people in different departments, in different countries, in different studios trust each other? No way. Don't let those idiots run the database. They're going to screw it up.
Transparency and the trustlessness is a benefit in lots more places than people might realize. Is what
and security and robustness. How many companies have got awful IT policies and crash their databases and lose all their data and so on? And it's single point of failure.
Right.
So really, what I think we're going to have on the ETC side is, Ethereum is going to be a good answer. Corporations, and it really is an Ethereum versus Ethereum Classic thing at all. It really just speaks something that I said in 2016. So I wrote a blog article that was called Ethereum Everywhere, where I was proposing that we relicensed the CPP Ethereum client to Apache, basically so that it could get into more hands. Let me read what I said at the time.
Oh, I do remember that controversy. Some people didn't want to license some code and you weren't very happy about that?
It got blocked by piracy in the end. Essentially, I think because it would have been too competitive to piracy. But yeah, this is what I wrote. This is July 2016. What is Ethereum? When we think about Ethereum, we think about public chain. And more specifically, we think about the public chain, the mainnet. That's quite natural within the frame of reference of Ethereum purely as a cryptocurrency, but it's a limited view of the possibilities which this new decentralized computing platform offers. Ethereum is much more than a better cryptocurrency. Ether is the fuel for the engine, but it's the Ethereum engine itself which opens up these new possibilities. The fuel is just the means to an end. We have the opportunity to build a set of technologies in the next few years which could have similar societal impact as when the internet, the World Wide Web, open source languages, databases, etc. became available. We are building a decentralized computing platform which every individual on Earth should benefit from. These technologies need to reach into every nook and cranny of our computing fabric, big and small, public and private, independent and corporate, smartwatches to mainframes. This is a large and ambitious undertaking that is addictive and all-consuming for many of us. Diversity of viewpoints, a broad spectrum of use cases to mature the base technology, and an open and inclusive attitude. An environment of collaboration will help us achieve our shared goals. And then just a quote from Vitalik about why do private and consortium chains matter. So he said, and this was earlier that same year, it's important to note that while the original Ethereum blockchain is a public blockchain, the Ethereum state transition rules, i.e. the part of the protocol that deals with processing transactions, executing contract code, etc., can be separated from the Ethereum public blockchain consensus algorithm, i.e. proof of work, and it's entirely possible to create private, run by one node controlled by one company, or consortium, run by a pre-specified set of nodes, blockchains that run the Ethereum code. Ethereum technology itself is thus arguably agnostic between whether it's applied in a public, consortium, or private model, and it is our goal to maximally aim for interoperability between various instantiations of Ethereum, i.e. one should be able to take contracts and applications that are written for public chain Ethereum and port them to private chain Ethereum and vice versa. So,
right, that can only help, in other words, to have more people using the technology.
So that's what I said 3.5 years ago. And we're finally getting there. And I closed this off with corporations don't love or hate you. And there's a fantastic quote. And this isn't my quote, it's by someone called B. Cantrill, whoever that is. A corporation doesn't love you or hate you. It's like a lawnmower. Put your hand in, it gets cut off. It doesn't hate you, it's just a lawnmower. It cuts everything.
Good point.
And yeah, I know technology companies are now the largest corporations in the world by market cap. Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, and Amazon are literally number 1, 2, 3, and 4 for the first quarter of 2016, ahead of oil companies, ahead of banks, ahead of every other industry. Most software developers are working for large corporations. These corporations need tools for businesses. Open source tools resourced by large corporations are now the norm. There's a world of difference between the current day and the hostile landscape which Richard Stallman was facing in the 1980s. And I say, Apple are obviously a money-making machine, but they also finance LLVM and Clang. Google do not have your best interests in heart, but that doesn't mean that the Go language is evil. Facebook, mixed in with their people farming, have brought us React. And Microsoft are night and day different from the Balmer horror days. So my conclusion there was corporations will build blockchain technology irrespective of what we do. It's already happening. Just as intranets and the internet have a role to play, so do public and private consortium chains. Maximalist thinking is not particularly helpful here. The real world never works in black and white, and demonizing people with similar but not identical goals is self-defeating. The author would rather have these corporations building Ethereum-based blockchain technology than have them building something completely incompatible, purely because of the license of copyleft licensing, which we've long planned to remove anyway. Having these corporations within a shared big tent rather than in rival camps gives us maximal synergy, and it taps the vast resources of these corporations to contribute to our goals, rather than letting them build rival ecosystems with zero synergy. So I say proceed with precaution, but please let's proceed. And I think that has happened now, that you see all of these threads starting to come back together. So I want ETC and the co-op to be part of that, and to really get in a position where people working on Classic can be, really, not feel that we're outside of the possibility to contribute to that. You look at Cody works at Accenture. He's spending the majority of his time on Quorum, which is, a Geth downstream, which JP Morgan had made, adding private transactions.
Right. Now, by the way, speaking of Quorum and these private blockchains, now I sometimes tell people that they can peg to a public blockchain, right? I could imagine them running a hash to a public blockchain like ETC or Ethereum. And by doing that, they kind of have the best of both worlds, right? Whatever reason they chose the private blockchain, but they can still have some measure of trustlessness and immutability.
Well, think of it like those L2 examples with the state channels.
The same idea, that's right.
Exactly the same idea. I think what you're going to end up with in the end is the idea of one chain to rule them all here. The blockchain, whatever the winning blockchain is going to have everything in the world on it. Is it going to be Bitcoin? Is it going to be Ethereum? Is it going to be something else? I mean, that's nonsense. You're not going to have a single chain with everything. I mean, that's as ludicrous an idea of saying, right, that the relational database has been invented. Great, let's have the world database. Would you like to add some rows and columns into the database? Is that going to scale? Is that going to work? Obviously not. To scale to global level, it's a straight latency throughput trade-off. And getting something on a global level public chain is the most expensive thing that you can possibly imagine. Coming to global consensus on the ledger, it's chronically expensive. And yes, it is worth it, for some of those.
Some things, yeah.
For some things. Right. Essentially, those some things right now are like money value transfers, is cryptocurrency. That's it. Right. Speculation. But so I saw something that was trying to work out how much more expensive is it to run code on the Ethereum mainnet versus running that same code on an AWS node. And it's something like 100 million times more expensive. That's the cost of that global consensus.
Wow.
So
only use it if you really need it, and
here's
count the costs.
Here's a trust spectrum, right? Is for that AWS node, it's running on somebody else's computer, and you're having complete trust in them that there's nothing dodgy going on, right? So that's I trust you, versus I am the most paranoid person in the world, and I want the most complete, verified everything ever.
Right.
And that's 100 million times cost. Is it stupid to think that there might be places on that spectrum of trust where there's value in the middle?
Right. Yeah, people can decide for themselves how much control and how paranoid they want to be.
That's right. And then the good thing is, because we're getting all of this interchain, bridges and things popping up, all of these things can start to talk to each other. So, in your, ideal scenario, well, hey, here we have this, this global public chain, which can be the root, anchor of everything. And, you can have all of these layers and layers of stuff dangling off it. But I mean, you will also have, you won't have just a single route. You're probably going to have, talking to sort of the format wars kind of view that Donald's talked about. You're probably going to have two or three at the base, and I think that will be, to my Bitcoin, Ethereum Classic, and maybe only those two. But you may well have more which aren't those. Like you see China seemingly about to have a state-backed currency. Maybe, and I don't know what tech they're going to use. But I don't know. Maybe it'll run on Neo or something. I don't know. I think others. That with Bitcoin and Ethereum Classic, those are going to be like the for the world, outside of all government control ones.
Right.
You're probably going to have a Fed coin, and you're probably going to have a Russia coin, and you're probably going to have a China coin. You're probably going to have one for all of your actual countries. And those are going to be useful as well. I mean, that stuff isn't useless. If you could have, here's a US dollar coin backed by the Fed that you can do digital payments with, like literally on your phone, pay with Fed coin, and you avoid all of the credit cards and PayPal and banks. That's useful. That's really useful, right?
Right.
A lot of people are not going to have any objection with, having their in Fed coins rather than in a bank.
And now
the banks could die. But, sitting with the Fed, I mean, obviously, it blows up when the country blows up. If you're an Argentinian or a Venezuelan, you probably don't want to be using Petro.
Yeah.
Purpose, you probably would prefer to have that in Bitcoin, and that's entirely logical. And that's the thing. Nobody can get forced into any of these. I think your Bitcoin and your Ethereum Classic, that's your escape valves for the world, and probably more. Like Zcash and Monero and others are going to have usefulness moving forward. But yeah, you will have multiple of these, L1s. Some, completely outside of countries like these, and some of them country specific, or maybe, you'll have ones which are corporate ones. Here's your Apple dollar, or your Google credit.
By the way, for anybody that's wants to read more about what you're saying about these tokens that are pegged to other assets like the U.S. dollar, they might want to look into what's referred to as stable coins. Like at Ethereum, they have DAI. DAI is, I think, the most popular example.
Stable coins are great as an interim step, but they're just price pegged. They're algorithmically trying to track. But what we'd be talking about here is issued by the Fed. It's not like can be converted with trying to track pace of. It's like literally this is money as per
the government backed. Yeah,
government backed 1-to-1.
Yes.
Right. So what you've done with that way is you've taken all of the corporations out of the link entirely. It's like you and the government, one-on-one.
Right. Yep. So that's a possibility.
So if you trust your government, that is awesome. The thing is, you don't have to purely trust your government, because you're going to have cryptocurrencies which are outside of those. So I guess you wouldn't call a Fed coin a cryptocurrency. It would be a digital currency. It's not crypto.
Right. Digital fiat currency.
Graphic currency.
Yeah.
But it's not got crypto economics going on.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Wow, we've been talking a while. We said a lot of good stuff. Anything else that we should add, or should we end there?
Well, just one more bit is
okay.
I also signed an agreement with Messari. Okay. So Messari.io are basically, it's like high quality data on blockchain.
Okay.
Masari, for example, have got on-chain FX, which is a way better version of CoinMarketCap.
Okay.
So if you go to masari.io,
Can you spell that so that people?
MESSARI.io.
Okay.
So if you search on there for Ethereum Classic, what you'll see is the original. Yeah, it says the original Ethereum blockchain. And it's got their, market cap, volume, supply, and so on. So what we'll be doing with Masari is, you see these stats that are sort of like developer activity, how many commits there are in the, in GitHub, and these kind of like information on how good or bad a particular project is. There hasn't been good information on Ethereum Classic, and a lot of that is just to do with all that stuff with the repos and Ethereum project, Ethereum Classic, and also that you've got things that are happening like on Parity and IOHK that are off to the side entirely. So you see these false things going around saying there's no developers on Ethereum Classic, and it's like, well, you're just looking in the wrong place.
Right. So
what we're going to have with Masari is better quality information on Classic, which is going to be available for investors. So if people are looking at Classic as an investment, they're going to have quite high quality data. Also, it's a transparency piece that the cooperative, we are a public charity, so we do IRS filings where we're going to be revealing who's been revealing pay, spending, income, outgoings, complete transparency on what's happening. So within Masari, you're going to have information available in a very, very open and clear way on the cooperative, and probably to a lesser degree on IOHK and Labs, but IOHK and Labs are also involved in this. So you're really going to get good public data on how Ethereum Classic works. What is the governance process on ECIPs? Who are the the commercial entities that are involved? Really like great information on Classic, and great transparency.
Right. Yes.
So
all positive developments. Yes.
Okay, I better leave it there.
All right. Well, thank you, Bob Summerwill. It's always great to talk to you, and your knowledge is impressive, and so you a great benefit to the community by sharing your opinions. And so look forward to our next chat together.
So yeah, let's not make it a year.
All right. So why don't we end there? And so best wishes to you, and until next time.
Okay, cheers.